And I know how to do
your
it your
way.
way. And people that speak multiple languages can communicate with more people.
Right.
So this isn't going to only help you in your relationship. This is going to actually help you in every single relationship in your life because
Right.
you will have more languages to communicate with other people.
Right. Wow. Okay. I love all this. I just want to look at one other point in the question really quickly. I'm curious if there's any place to say, like, at what point does something become too needy, right? Like some women are really just emotionally aware and we can like speak the therapy jargon and we have all the right things to say, blah, blah, blah. And sometimes we're just quote unquote too needy. I mean, I don't believe in too needy because like we want you
too needy from somebody else rather
Yeah.
than I have needs and I know how to satisfy them
for myself.
Right. Through other relationships, through other connections, and you're not my only you're not my everything.
Right. So how in this using this question as an example, where's the place to say she's got her own work to do also, and that it's not all on him?
I think that has to be a part of every conversation.
Okay.
Right? Like she's feeling, oh, I need this from you. And I think at every point he needs to say, right, like we communicate your way, we communicate my way. And like for this moment, we're trying it this way. Mm-hmm. And that's what it is. Like that's where we're at. That's part of the communication, which is I can't move at that pace. Right. Again, if we go back to languages and I'm speaking a language and I'm not speaking your language and I'm speaking really quickly and I'm just moving, you can't even understand me. Right. But when I actually slow it down, like I'm thinking about Hebrew, I'm like, please, could you just...
No, totally. I do that all the time.
In English, I speed it up to 2.0. I'm like, and I can hear everything and I can understand it. But in Hebrew, I'm like, okay, how about 0.75? Right. Okay. And then I can actually move with it and understand it more. Sometimes moving at a slower pace is going to help you to understand it more. But I think he needs confidence to say, you have something really great to offer. It's one of the things I love about you, and it's one of the things that frustrates me about you. Mm-hmm. This is a challenge, and I have something really great to offer. And I know parts of that also frustrate you, and there's some things that are really wonderful. Let's just
learn each other's languages.
Let's learn each other's languages.
I love it.
And he has the patience to do this. Right. And he has the mindset to do it. He has the maturity to do it. So
I mean, just from the question. Right. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Good luck. Keep us updated. Okay. Thank you so much. I am so happy to be with you here. I love your questions. Please send them in to me at Eliza Ben Shalom. And please remember, until next time, matches make families, families make communities, and communities change the world.
And joining us now with more on Iran is Benham Ben Talebu, Senior Director of the Iran Program at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Great to be with you. Thank you.
So the Trump administration is insisting on continuing negotiations with the Ayatollah regime. And what kind of remains unclear, there's many conflicting reports, that the negotiations, are they solely focusing on the nuclear issue, or are they also addressing the ballistic missile and regional proxy threat?
Well, even if they did focus solely on the nuclear issue, it would be a mistake to ignore the missile threat, because ballistic missiles can indeed carry weapons of mass destruction like nuclear weapons. So there's an incentive to certainly nest that issue into the larger nuclear complex, if you will. The challenge is the Trump administration, in particular President Trump, has been saying multiple things about what a deal does and does not include in the scope of their negotiations. And I guess right now their goal is to make sure that American allies and American adversaries have to keep hedging to figure out the exact parameters of the nuclear talks.
Mm-hmm. And now President Trump also stated that Operation Midnight Hammer back in June completely destroyed Iran's nuclear program. So if that is the case, I mean, what is there to discuss now regarding the nuclear program? I mean, what threat does the regime pose on this issue today?
Well, what the Operation Midnight Hammer destroyed, and make no mistake, it did destroy 3 major nuclear facilities. It earned a pause. It earned a stop in enrichment in Iran, which we had not seen since April 2006. So that's why it was both historic and impactful. But what what the operation took away was the regime's enrichment capacity, meaning how much enrichment it could do at a certain period of time, because it targeted 2 enrichment facilities and 1 larger nuclear complex. But it did not remove entirely Iran's enrichment capability. That enrichment capability is what was actually targeted by the Israelis for the other portion of the 12-day war, to include centrifuge production plants, to include nuclear scientists, to including other nuclear research centers, and things of the like. But there still is a lingering capability there, whether you're looking at technical know-how, other facilities, or personnel.
And Israeli and even U.S. officials, we've heard, are expressing skepticism about reaching a deal, a nuclear deal or any other kind of deal. And so even if a deal is reached, can the U.S. trust that the regime will even uphold their end of the deal? Because we know in the past they've lied, they've misled the international community, they've misled atomic inspectors. So can they even be trusted to uphold the deal?
In short, no, but that's, in my view, not even the main reason to have qualms with the deal or with any deal at this moment in time. Because I believe there is no nuclear off-ramp, there is no diplomatic off-ramp to the crisis that has forced this conversation right now. And that crisis, missing from the conversation about talks that are slated to be held in Geneva tomorrow, is that they are going to be on the back end of the worst repression, the worst mass killing from the state against the street in the 47-year history of the Islamic Republic, and also in the past century and a half of contemporary Iranian history. When we're looking at that small window of time in January between when 36 to 43,000 protesters were killed by this regime, President Trump not once, not twice, but multiple times offered assistance to the Iranians, said that he would hold those who engaged in the crackdown responsible, and even said that help was on the way. And that's why right now nuclear talks can indeed be disheartening. And one, in my view, medium-term reason that the administration and that the Iranians are actually engaging with the administration is to actually create this impression of the loss of American support in the psyche of Iranian dissidents and in the psyche of Iranian protesters who are banking on that Western assistance. So you're right. Not only is there no trust, and not only is the Islamic Republic keen to run the clock past the Trump administration and say we lived past max pressure 2.0 like we did max pressure 1.0, but right now, again, there is no moral, political, strategic case for that engagement. But make no mistake, President Trump is as much negotiator-in-chief as he is commander-in-chief, so he's looking to exhaust all options before going back to the use of force.
And it's interesting that you brought that up. That was actually going to be my next question, really, is how can the Trump administration or President Trump reconcile sort of those tweets, you know, help is on the way, urging Iranians to take to the street, you know, and then seeing the Iranian regime cross his red line and yet still go into sort of the diplomacy option. I mean, how does he reconcile that? And should they reach a deal, I mean, what you know will happen to the Iranian people?
Well, it's critical that he does reconcile that for 3 reasons, in my view. One, political, is that the Trump administration, both in term 1 and term 2, has tried to draw a very sharp contrast to its Democratic predecessor. Just look at the Obama administration, for example. President Trump drew a sharp contrast with Obama in 2009, who didn't support Iran's Green Movement protests and preference nuclear diplomacy. And instead, in President Trump's first term, he issued strong rhetorical and political support multiple times for Iranian protesters. So, you know, he has a political interest to keep drawing that sharp contrast rather than create a comparison. Next, of course, is strategic. After actually the Obama administration failed to enforce its own red line in Syria in 2013, you may remember, in 2014, the Russians invaded Crimea. And similarly, every time the U.S. looks weak abroad, it actually invites more kind of chaos and mayhem at, you know, the global stage. 2021, the U.S. left Afghanistan in a very disastrous way, as you may remember. Months later, the U.S. failed to deter Putin from invading Ukraine again in early 2022 for strategic reasons. The president has an incentive to uphold his red lines, and also for moral reasons, to course correct, get to the heart of what he mentioned. He promised support to the most pro-American and to the most pro-Israeli population in the heartland of the Muslim Middle East. Those things are hard to find in that part of the world. That's a card that ought not to be burned. President Trump is remarkably popular in Iran because of him breaking all the taboos in his first term. It'd be a shame to lose that political capital and vindicate the talking points of some of the most anti-American folks in that part of the world.
So certainly critical days ahead. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you.
As tensions mount between Washington and Tehran, we're now joined by Dr. Mordechai Kedar, Middle East expert at Bar-Ilan University, to break this down. Hi, and thank you for joining.
Good afternoon.
President Trump says to Iran, give us the right deal and we won't attack. So what would a right deal realistically look like, in your opinion, from Washington's perspective? And would Tehran even agree to it?
As much as I understood, he talks about the nuclear program and the missile program, and maybe spreading terrorism all over the Middle East. This is all he demands that the agreement will include, and America will be satisfied. But the big problem is the regime itself. He should have demanded that all the mullahs are leaving Iran to China or to Russia or to somewhere else in the world, and leave the government and change the government altogether. This should have been the demand. If they want to keep their life, they should succumb to such a demand. Yet, as much as I understand from the what is published about the negotiations, everything is about some nuclear program, missile program, or other programs, while the regime itself will remain. And this is the problem. The regime is the problem, not only the nuclear program or others.
Right.
And this should have been, under the American demand to change.
And what about from Israel's perspective? Are the American and Israeli perspectives aligned?
As much as I understand, there is a difference between Israel and the United States. While the United States takes into account the possibility to come to some terms about these questions and to have an agreement, which will be good for the United States. Any agreement which will leave the Iranian regime as it is a bad agreement. Because from the Israeli point of view, the only cure to the Iranian problem is to change the regime dramatically, maybe with the Shah, without the Shah. In my humble view, Iran should be divided to ethnic states, a state for the Persians, a state for the Kurdish, because there is no Iranian nation. Iran is made of many nations, many ethnic groups, and most of them are subjugated to the Persians, and they deserve to have their own independence.
Now, we've seen massive protests inside Iran and 250,000-person rally in Munich supporting a regime change, just like you say, which is necessary. How significant are these protests?
It happened yesterday, not only in Munich, at least I know from firsthand, in Toronto as well. Hundreds of thousands of expats from Iran demonstrated in Toronto as well. Look, to say the least, the Iranian regime today is very, very unpopular, especially after what happened a month or 40 days or 39 days ago, the mass massacre in Iran. Don't forget that most of those who demonstrate out of Iran are people who ran away from the regime, ran away from the coercion of religion, ran away from the atrocities, ran away from the poverty, ran away from all the problems which the regime caused already 47 years since it came to power. And for them, it's only natural to demonstrate against the regime, and maybe even to demand the return of the Reza, the son of the Shah, as an alternative, not because he's so beloved by people. People still remember his father. And his father was not such a kind man, after all. But as a substitute to the mullahs, they would accept also Reza.
Dr. Mordechai Kedar, thank you very much for this input.
Thank you so much.
And joining us now from Washington is veteran Israeli journalist Ariel Kahana. Thanks so much for being with us.
Hi, Steve, good to be with you.
Unlike previous meetings, there was no photo op or press conference this time at the White House where Trump and Netanyahu could be asked questions. Nevertheless, what have you managed to learn?
Correct. Yes, it was a very low profile, Steve, in this visit, the seventh meeting just on this term of President Trump. And as you said, we had no opportunity to ask questions, to talk to the president or to the prime minister. And the prime minister, by the way, made no interviews to the media here in America what he is doing when he is coming to Washington, at least in the right-wing leaning media. We saw nothing of all that. Now, what I get from that, my understanding, but also, let's say, hints, is that it's on purpose. And there are a few reasons why the profile is low by both sides. When it comes to Israel, I think Netanyahu doesn't want to be seen as the one who is leading what could be the next war with Iran. We all know, as Trump is saying, there is an armada on way. So it seems that the United States is gonna lead the next round against Iran if we're really gonna see it. So I think Netanyahu doesn't want it to be seen as if Israel is pushing or leading a war that the United States is gonna handle. So that's one reason for the low profile by Israel. From Trump is it seems, again, that's the hints I get. There are more preparations that should be done. Of course, we see the pressures coming from the other side. I mean, like Turkey and Qatar and others, not to on Trump, not to act against Iran. So maybe Trump is, trying to figure out his way on this conflict. So all in all, at this point, he prefers to low profile and not to talk about it too much. So that's my understanding why we didn't see him talking to us, the reporters here.
Well, Ariel, Trump says the one thing he did say after the meeting is that he's determined to pursue a deal. And the noise out of Tehran says that talks on ballistic missiles are a non-starter. Are there any indications from the U.S. that they can get Iran to even discuss the missiles or anything, the proxies?
Well, we saw the unpredicted in many cases, so, I can't say it's 0%. But in my humble opinion, it's no more than 1% to see any kind of a deal between Trump and Iran. First of all, as you said, the Iranians are not ready to talk about other issues. And even if Trump will agree to talk just about the uranium, I mean, we were here, we were at this point a year ago, and there was no deal because the Iranians refused to give up on enriching uranium. So even in that field, there are zero chances, or I said 1% chance to have a deal. On top of that, as you said, they are not ready to talk about the missiles and about the other issues, which Trump loudly said just this week. He do want it to be part of a new deal. So the chances, again, in my opinion, to have a deal between the sides is very, very extremely low. Okay, and then the question is, if there is no deal, will there be a war? That's another question. I noticed the quotes by Senator Kennedy and Senator Lindsey Graham, who both met Trump the last days. Both of them said he is obligated, as he said publicly, to the Iranian people. And that means that at some point he will act. That's my understanding, again, from what is said by him and by others, including by some leaks of the record. So, again, in my humble opinion, it's not a question of if Trump will act, it's a question of when. Maybe it's going to be in days, maybe in weeks, maybe more. But bottom line, this problem, I mean, if Trump will stand to his word, and I guess he will, at some point he will have no other choice but to act.
The Iranian protesters certainly were shouting from their balconies yesterday against Khamenei. They were shouting for the U.S. They were waiting for that promised help that Trump promised. Is there any sign, whatever, that help is on the way for the Iranian people, aside from the missiles and the proxies and the nuclear, to bring down the regime?
So first of all, I think we have to say they are heroes. All those people who shouted from their balconies and from their homes, although the huge massacre they suffered from that brutal regime, each one of those people is a hero. Now, I think the question you raised is one of the reasons why we didn't see yet an American attack. And that is because it's not enough to hit the regime, And of course, America can do that very strongly. The other point is whether we have an opposition, whether we have someone else that can replace this regime. I guess, I don't know, but I guess it's part of the preparations. I would say it makes sense. It should be part of the preparations for an American operation. But once again, Lindsey Graham and Senator Kennedy, both of them met Trump this week and said that his promise, help is on the way, is still relevant. It's still here. So I guess they know what they heard from Trump.
Ariel Kahana, thanks so much for being with us. We'll see you in the coming days.
Thank you very much. Yeah, and weeks. Yeah, thank you very much.
And joining us now for more on Iran is Hussein Abdul Hussein. He's a research fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. Hussein, thank you for joining us. We know what Prime Minister Netanyahu's message there in Washington is. Any agreement has to include issues like the ballistic missile program of Iran and support for terror proxies. But President Trump does want a deal. How much do you think he's going to take those concerns in consideration in deciding whether to move on a deal or move ahead with a strike?
Well, it seems to me that recently President Trump has added the item of ballistic missiles to his demand. So he used to just mention the nuclear, and now we see that even though he says that he wants a deal, and even though he said that Iran also very much wants a deal, he also made sure to add the ballistic missile demand. And we know that the Iranians have drawn a red line, and by saying that this is a non-starter for them. So if this is the case, then I see that to an extent the U.S. and Israel are on the same page. You know, if we can get rid of the ballistic missile, whether through peace or through war.
Now, we know that there's going to be another round of negotiations. The Iranians are masters at dragging out these kind of talks, playing for time. What kind of deadline do you think the U.S. is going to put on them? What kind of deadline do you think should there be?
Logically speaking, we cannot have our forces on high alert in the Gulf, having our aircraft carrier just sitting there in the middle of the Gulf doing nothing. There's a time limit for all this deployment. There's a time when all these assets should go back home to where they came from. So it seems to me that there is a deadline, a military one. We either strike or we get the Iranians to concede, but we can't just drag on like things used to be during the Obama years, or sometime in the past when talks were open-ended.
Right. Now, President Trump is hearing Prime Minister Netanyahu's message. We know he also hears other voices from the region, especially, for example, the Gulf states, the Arab states in the Gulf, an area you have some expertise in. What is he hearing from them, and how much of an influence is that going to play in making his final decision whether to deal or strike?
Well, President Trump is mostly hearing from Saudi Arabia. And at this point, we understand that the Saudis, what they used to consider as a threat after the June war, Iran has not been as much a threat to them as it used to be before the June war. So this is something that's been taken care of. Now, add to it that from a Saudi perspective, there's an economic angle. A weak Iranian government under sanctions is much better than a revamped Iranian government that can bring to the oil market another 3 or 4 million barrels of oil at the time when oil is really very cheap on the global market. So the Saudi calculus is very different from the Israeli calculus. Israel looks at Iran for the time being as an existential threat, and as such, it has an interest in either having the Iranians really concede or be struck and these, the missiles and the nuclear is taken out of Iranian hands.
Hussein, where do all these developments leave those, the Iranian people, those that took to the streets, were hoping for some kind of action to help their situation from the U.S. or from the international community?
Well, it's unfortunate that if the Iranian people really factors in, they're usually item number 4. So they come after the nuclear, the ballistic, the proxies, and number 4. And by the time we get to number 4, we know that if the Iranian regime is conceding, then that'll be really down on its list and nothing much will change for them. By the same token, if we strike Iran and end up taking out the nuclear capabilities and the ballistic missile capabilities, then we also know that these people will stay under the regime, and no one thinks that our strike will end up taking the whole regime out. So it's unfortunate that we promised these people help. I don't see how we can offer it to them. I hope that by weakening the Iranian regime, it will be too weak to oppress them as it's been using to. But at this point, I don't really see a clear plan for how we can help these people out of the tyranny of the Islamist regime.
That's unfortunate. Let's hope for the better or best for them. Hussein Abdul Hussein there from the FDD in Washington. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, as the negotiations continue between the U.S. and the Islamic regime in Iran, joining us now to discuss the latest developments is former Deputy National Security Advisor Chuck Freilich. Chuck, thank you so much for joining us. Always a pleasure to have you on here. Where do you think things stand today with the Trump administration? Has any actual progress been made towards a deal, given the regime's actions and statements as well?
Well, I think where things stand is really something that's only knowable if you have direct access to President Trump's thinking. He keeps his cards very close to him, and he also is capable of changing his mind at any period, at any point. I think we're reaching a stage where a decision will have to be made. It doesn't have to be made this week or next week. I think Trump can still play for time here. The talks have begun. They made at least enough progress so that both sides expressed an interest to continue them. Whether the progress goes beyond the simple agreement to continue talking is as yet unclear.
Now, what would a successful deal actually look like for the United States? Because the reality is, of course, we know the regime can't be trusted to keep its word based on history. They're still executing Iranians throughout this week even. So what would a deal look like?
Well, we know what we would like a deal to look like. And here, there's actually no daylight between the U.S. and Israel. There may be daylight in terms of what each side is willing to settle for. The ideal agreement would basically end Iran's entire military nuclear program, no enrichment whatsoever, removing the existing highly enriched uranium stockpile out of Iran, and some other measures on the nuclear issue. It will include a complete ban, at least on their long-range missiles, the ones capable of reaching Israel, and an end to their support for the various proxies in the region. Now, where there may be daylight between the sides is that Trump may wish to settle for a deal which focuses solely or primarily on the nuclear issue. Israel doesn't want to see the other two issues left aside, especially since at the moment, in the short term, the more pressing issue is actually the missiles and not the nuclear issue. It's, of course, the greater danger in the long term. It's truly an existential threat. But at the moment, the program hasn't advanced in any significant way since the attack in June. And the ballistic missile program, conversely, is progressing significantly, even rapidly. The good news here is that while they're building lots of rockets, lots of missiles, they have apparently not been able to rebuild the launcher arsenal. So they've got lots of missiles that they can fire on fewer launchers, which makes it harder for them to do so, to launch them, and somewhat easier for us to, or for the U.S. to attack them because there are fewer targets.
Well, we do see Prime Minister Netanyahu making an urgent trip to Washington now. In your take, what is Israel's concern here with the deal? You mentioned the hesitation about an only nuclear deal. Is it even theoretically possible that we would see Israel act alone militarily in the event that we don't see a good deal in Israel's eyes?
I don't think Israel has the freedom of maneuver today to do something against Mr. Trump's wishes. Now, if he's willing to okay an operation or just give a nod, even an unspoken yellow light, but something that's clearly understood, that's one thing. But I don't think we can act without the U.S. There's a possibility that this operation, just like in June, might end up being a joint operation. Unlike June, this time it would presumably be the U.S., the leading actor, with Israel providing additional support, whereas in June it was precisely the opposite.
All right, well, we will have to stay tuned and keep you updated on what happens with that. We'll be following the talks closely. But I want to thank you, former National Security Advisor Chuck Freilich. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, before we continue, a quick word about how you can support independent journalism at ILTV. We're committed to bringing you original reporting and stories from Israel that often do not make it into the global spotlight. If you value diverse perspectives and reliable coverage, you can now subscribe through our app to help ILTV News grow. Just scan the QR code on your screen to help us expand our reporting, continue delivering the kind of journalism that informs, challenges, and connects. Your subscription helps us do more than report the news. It helps us ensure that stories from the region are told with depth, integrity, and clarity. With your support, we can continue building a space for journalism that informs, connects, and inspires.
ILTV News, your source for Israel in English. Reporting from the ground where it happens, as it happens. An authentic, trusted voice in daily Israel news. Airing on 11 international TV channels and now launching a 24/7 Israeli news channel. Reaching millions every month across all social platforms. Independent, real, powered by truth. We don't just report, we connect. Thanks to a worldwide community that stands for truth. This is ILTV, your source for Israel in English.
Welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Emily Schrader, and coming up in today's newscast. U.S. continues military buildup near Iran as Tehran rejects U.S. red lines. President Trump's Board of Peace for Gaza kicks off its inaugural meeting. Hezbollah refuses disarmament in Lebanon in violation of ceasefire. U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance says nuclear talks with Iran in Geneva showed some progress, but warns Tehran is still refusing to acknowledge President Donald Trump's red lines. Vance said President Trump is demanding solutions through diplomacy or another option as the U.S. military presence continues to build. More from ILTV's Steve Leibowitz.
Speaking to Fox News, Vice President J.D. Vance said the two sides agreed to continue talks after yesterday's second round, but made clear that Iran has yet to accept key American demands, including that it must never obtain a nuclear weapon. Vance said President Trump is seeking a solution through diplomacy or another option, but reserves the right to declare when talks have reached their end.
I think the president has a lot of options. We do have a very powerful military. The president's shown a willingness to use it. He also has a remarkable diplomatic team. He's shown a willingness to use that, too. And so what the president has been very clear with the Iranians, and actually I just talked to Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner this morning about some of their negotiations, is the United States has certain red lines. Our primary interest here is we don't want Iran to get a nuclear weapon. We don't want nuclear proliferation.
A U.S. official said Iran agreed to return with detailed proposals within 2 weeks to try to close remaining gaps. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi described the talks as constructive and said understandings were reached on guiding principles. Meanwhile, open-source flight trackers and U.S. officials confirmed that more than 50 American fighter jets, including F-22s, F-35s, and F-16s, have moved toward the Middle East in the past 24 24 hours, along with refueling aircraft. The U.S. has reinforced its military presence with the aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln, currently in the region, and the USS Gerald R. Ford en route, accompanied by destroyers. For its part, the Iranian Navy temporarily shut down parts of the Straits of Hormuz while conducting live-fire military exercises, including missile launches. The strait, a critical global energy choke point, was closed for several hours as Iranian forces carried out drills in a sign of defiance in the face of U.S. threats. Israeli officials predict that the negotiations are likely doomed, describing Iran's optimism as a possible smokescreen. Jerusalem assesses that Trump and his close advisors may be preparing the ground for a military strike, and that the president wants to show diplomacy was fully exhausted first.
Families across Iran have been defying heavy regime pressure and threats to honor victims of the January protests, as the 40th day memorial marks a powerful symbol of resistance. Across Iran, mourners gathered at gravesites holding memorials for those killed in the crackdown on January 8th and 9th. Despite threats from security forces, cemetery closures, and heavy patrols, families performed traditional rituals, released doves, and even danced in grief. Videos show crowds chanting "Death to Khamenei" and applauding the slain, with internet disruptions reported in several areas. Victims ranged widely in age, including children and teens, highlighting the heavy toll on Iran's youth. Footage surfaced from multiple cities, including Mashhad, showing regime forces raiding and arresting mourners. In the village of Chenar, regime forces violently raided a memorial and arrested a reported 400 Iranians, including children, out of a population of only 4,000. Chenar went viral in the past month for tearing down a statue of the late IRGC terrorist commander Qasem Soleimani, and again for the 40-day memorial yesterday, as they held a large protest and chanted "Death to the dictator." As of now, tens of thousands have been arrested across Iran from the protests, which began in December. And with each day, the regime is sentencing more to death. All the while, the regime itself held a memorial appropriating the deaths of the civilians they massacred and claimed it was the result of Zionist sedition. Analysts say the 40th day memorial has become a potent symbol of public defiance, illustrating the deep wounds left by the regime's crackdown and the continuing determination of Iranians to honor those killed. Well, joining us now to discuss the latest in Iran is Orel Tobelem, the Director of Research at the Forum for Foreign Relations. Orel, thanks as always for being with us today on ILTV. Disturbing scenes from Iran once again as the violence against the Iranian people continues by the regime, as we see the regime itself doubling down on this propaganda narrative, attempting to blame Zionists for the tens of thousands of casualties. How effective is this tactic that we're seeing?
Thank you, Emily. It's a pleasure to be on. Now, as you've noted, there are deeply disturbing scenes that continue to emerge from Iran, where citizens have been killed, tens of thousands of them, across 40 days of brutal crackdowns on protests, which featured about 20 days of an internet blackout. We've seen new accounts from medical staff in the southeastern city of Kerman indicating that between January 8th and January 9th, as many as 36,000 protesters were killed nationwide over just 2 days. State media and senior officials have characterized the protesters themselves as terrorists and the movement as a form of American Zionist sedition. This is a familiar refrain. It's an attempt to recast domestic dissent as foreign subversion. The regime is quite a mastermind when it comes to much of this rhetoric. In parallel, the IRGC has staged counter ceremonies to the ones that you just described, in which chants of death to America and death to Israel are ringing out alongside Quranic recitations and religious eulogies. Now, the overwhelming majority of Iranians, both within the country and across the diaspora, are simply not buying it. That skepticism, however, has not extended to certain online personalities. Now, the British Pakistani activist Bushra Sheikh for example, has been touring Tehran, portraying the regime as a haven of religious freedom, but I would say that we should expect nothing less from career imbeciles. The Islamic Republic itself appears to be borrowing a media playbook that has been used and is currently being used by the state of Qatar, which is to deploy digital influencers as instruments of reputational recovery, hoping that reels and tweets can somehow cover up the sound of live ammunition. In the case of Iran, that tactic is only working and only effective to those who are already radicalized. So in answer to your question, it's not really effective.
Well, I want to shift to the U.S. negotiations. We know they're ongoing between the regime and the United States, but we saw Vice President J.D. Vance state unequivocally that the regime is not prepared to meet President Trump's red lines. Do you expect this to change?
Yes, but the first task is to establish what President Trump's red lines actually are. So by mid-January, it appeared that beyond explicit declarations of war and proxy force expansion across the region, as well as uranium enrichment, a further threshold had been set by President Trump, which was the regime's systematic execution and brutalization of protesters, especially behind closed doors. Now, Tehran has crossed that line, albeit without the spectacle of public hangings that they said they were going to have. However, Washington's subsequent engagement in very choreographed, performative talks with regime officials in Oman suggests that that line may not be as red would be for President Trump. Now, the optics themselves point to mounting pressure from the Gulf states, particularly Qatar, which stand to bear the brunt of any kinetic escalation given Iran's still substantial stockpiles of short-range ballistic missiles. Additionally, even though the regime is still weakened, it still possesses the necessary capabilities to cause serious destruction across the region, as well as the obstruction of vital maritime shipping routes in the Persian Gulf, particularly the Strait of Hormuz. Strategic caution in Doha and Riyadh, which has been underscored, for example, by Khalid bin Salman, the Saudi defense minister, his visits to Washington in late January, followed by his meeting with the Qatari emir a few days later, appears to have actually translated into diplomatic restraint in Washington. Now, J.D. Vance, of course, has reiterated that preventing Iranian nuclear proliferation is still a priority, but it's difficult to imagine Tehran offering anything beyond the familiar choreography of assurances and elastic commitments that it has made in the past. They are simply going to be retracted once scrutiny fades.
Well, I want to ask you, we see a whole lot of hardware being sent to the Middle East, the largest buildup since the Gulf War for the United States. Do you expect to see some kind of military action in the coming days or weeks against the Islamic Republic?
Well, look, in recent days, there have been reports of a buildup of fighter jets and warships in close proximity to Iran, especially off the coast of Oman. We talked about the USS Abraham Lincoln. It carries roughly 90 aircraft, and that includes F-35 fighter jets, and I think several thousands, I think 5,000 crew members. I suspect that Trump is banking on the credible prospect of American military intervention to coerce Tehran into a deal. I mean, he did tweet, I believe at the beginning of February, that a massive armada is heading to Iran, but the objective is not necessarily war at this stage, but leverage. Trump wants to be able to exhaust all diplomatic channels and keep them even nominally open so that if war is on the table, it looks justified. I don't think that military action will be likely in the coming days, but perhaps in the coming weeks or months. That will depend on two principal variables. The first is whether the regime continues to maintain its very high degree of intransigence on the nuclear file, and the second is the extent to which it continues to employ lethal force against its own citizens. Those two dynamics will ultimately determine whether deterrence holds or collapses.
All right, well, we'll be following that closely. For now, we do have to end. I want to thank you, Orel Tobelem, for joining us today.
Thank you, Emily.
At U Haifa International, academic excellence isn't just a standard, it's a way of life. With 21 English-taught master's programs, world-class faculty, and Israel's top national score in the Times Higher Education Impact Rankings, students grow in every direction.
If you really want to challenge yourself academically, grow in a very diverse community, and be immersed in such an important and significant environment, University of Haifa is the place for you.
Located on the stunning Carmel Ridge, the U Haifa blends academic excellence with a welcoming community.
U Haifa International has a great combination of top-notch academics with a great community of students.
Whether you're pursuing a one-year master's or diving into research, U Haifa gives you the tools, mentorship, and real-life insight to make your mark on the world. U Haifa International. Master your mind, live your Israel experience.
Well, an IDF soldier has been killed in what the Army describes as a friendly fire incident in southern Gaza overnight. The fallen soldier has been named as Staff Sergeant Ofer Yafeh, 21 years old, a fighter in the Paratrooper Brigade's reconnaissance unit from HaYogev. The IDF says he was fatally hit by gunfire from other Israeli forces during a Khan Yunis demolition operation in the area. The circumstances of the incident are under further investigation. Yafeh is the 5th Israeli service member killed since the ceasefire that took effect on October 10th, and the 925th fallen soldier since Hamas's October 7th attack. Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar will represent Israel at the inaugural Board of Peace meeting in Washington this Thursday, chaired by U.S. President Donald Trump. The board aims to oversee the implementation of the U.S. peace plan for Gaza, but as fighting continues in the Strip and Hamas disarmament is still far away, the stakes remain high. Let's cross now to our correspondent, Alec Pollard. Alec, what can you tell us?
Yes, Emily. So Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar is departing to the United States with two crucial missions. One, to represent Israel in the inaugural meeting of the new Board of Peace for Gaza. And secondly, to attend a UN Security Council session on developments in the Middle East. Sa'ar will join leaders from 28 countries at the board's meeting, chaired by Trump and tasked with overseeing the reconstruction of post-war Gaza and ensuring implementation of the U.S. peace plan. But the body enters a highly contentious environment. Hamas has called on the board to pressure Israel to halt what it claims are ongoing violations of the ceasefire, describing the situation in Gaza as a continuing war of genocide. Israeli officials reject these accusations. Since the start of the ceasefire in October, the IDF says dozens of terror operatives and suspects have been killed for crossing the yellow line, the ceasefire line, and attacking troops, and targeted strikes have continued against Hamas and allied infrastructure. The board's inaugural session will not only focus on funding and reconstruction, but also face questions on accountability, ceasefire enforcement, and regional security. Israel's main goal will be to ensure its security needs. First and foremost, the disarmament of Hamas and removal of its personnel from the post-war civil administration of the Strip. But Israel will face a tough task from Hamas supporters Turkey and Qatar, who will also feature prominently on the board. Thus, this Board of Peace is said to be another arena for diplomatic struggles. And as we know, while Israel wins on the battlefield, the IDF wins on the battlefield, in these diplomacy battles, it is not nearly as successful, although there are hopes that the board under the chairmanship of Trump will be a lot fairer to Israel than the UN, which has been historically extremely hostile. And of course, there is that UN Security Council meeting session, which Sa'ar will be attending as well. Back to you, Emily.
All right, Alec, thank you for that update. The month-long Ramadan began overnight, and Israeli security forces are sending a dual message, publicly wishing a peaceful and blessed holy month to those observing it, while at the same time intensifying operations in Jerusalem, Judea, and Samaria to prevent attacks and maintain stability during a highly sensitive period that historically has seen an increase in terror attacks against Israelis. ILTV's Devo Klein has more.
Ramadan began last night in Israel, Judea and Samaria, and Gaza after the new crescent moon was officially sighted across much of the region. Official moon sighting committees in Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and Qatar announced that the new moon was seen, marking the start of the Muslim holy month. Palestinian media reported that the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem and the Palestinian territories also confirmed the sighting. In Oman, however, the moon was not spotted, and Ramadan will begin there only tonight. In Jerusalem and across the West Bank, Palestinians decorated streets and shops with colorful lights and ornaments, stocking up on food and sweets ahead of the fast. Near Hebron, a giant illuminated Ramadan crescent was erected to draw visitors and revive local businesses after months of tensions. Ramadan, the 9th and holiest month of the Islamic calendar, is a time of fasting from dawn to dusk, prayer, and community. It will conclude with the festival of Eid al-Fitr at the next new moon. The IDF published a message on social media wishing a peaceful Ramadan to those observing the month. At the same time, the Israel Defense Forces is intensifying nightly operations in Judea and Samaria during the Muslim holy month of Ramadan to prevent attacks and maintain stability during a highly sensitive period. The IDF says arrest raids and troops reinforcements are underway in key flashpoints, with a focus on Nablus in northern Samaria. Forces are working to dismantle terror networks and thwart attacks against Israeli civilians, both in the territories and inside Israel. Commanders are stressing the need for a constant security presence, with reservists from the Menashe Brigade still operating around the clock, including in volatile areas near Joseph's tomb. In recent weeks, security forces have arrested suspected militants and incitement figures, while also holding warning talks with former prisoners. In Jerusalem, authorities are finalizing arrangements for access to the Temple Mount, as police prepare for large crowds. Officials say the combination of strong security and a community outreach is aimed at ensuring a calm Ramadan despite regional tensions.
Well, Hezbollah now says it rejects the Lebanese government's plan to disarm the terror group within 4 months, calling it a move serving Israel. Amid the fragile ceasefire, the IDF continues to hit Hezbollah and other threats. The latest operation took out 2 Islamic Jihad operatives crossing from Lebanon into Syria. More from ILTV's Steve Leibowitz.
The latest IDF airstrike took place near the village of Majd al-Anjar in the Bekaa Valley, on a road leading from Beirut to Damascus, about 40 kilometers north of Israel. The IDF says the targeted operatives had been working to advance terror activities against Israel from Lebanese territory and posed an immediate threat to citizens and IDF troops in Syria. Lebanese authorities reported 4 people were killed. Meanwhile, in Beirut, Hezbollah officials said the government's 4-month timeline for implementing the second phase of the nationwide disarmament plan was unacceptable. Hezbollah Secretary General Sheikh Naim Qassem described the effort as a mistake that, what he said, serves the goals of Israeli aggression. Shiite ministers walked out of the cabinet meeting in protest. Israel maintains that Hezbollah's weapons outside of state control pose a direct threat to security and say actions like the strike on the Syrian-Lebanese border are part of ongoing efforts to prevent Hezbollah and other terror factions from rebuilding and rearming along the northern border.
Israel is moving closer to deploying its next-generation missile defense system. The head of Israel Aerospace Industries says the new Arrow 4 interceptor will significantly boost the country's ability to shoot down ballistic missiles. ILTV's Kalev Ben David reports.
The president and CEO of Israel Aerospace Industries, Boaz Levy, says the in-development Arrow 4 system will increase Israel's interception success rates and help the country stay ahead of evolving threats. Speaking at a defense technology expo in Tel Aviv, Levy said IAI focuses on future threats, not just current ones. He confirmed that Arrow 4, designed to replace the long-serving Arrow 2, is expected to enter operational deployment in the coming months. The Arrow 4 is the latest generation in Israel's Arrow family, developed with the U.S. Missile Defense Agency. It is designed to intercept ballistic missiles within the atmosphere and to handle advanced threats, including maneuverable and potentially hypersonic missiles that challenge traditional defense systems. Arrow 4 will work alongside the Arrow 3, which has been operational since 2017. The older Arrow 2, first deployed in 1998, is expected to be phased out over time. The Arrow systems have already been used in direct confrontations with Iran, which has fired ballistic missiles at Israel from distances of more than 1,500 kilometers. Arrow 4 will form part of Israel's broader multi-tier air defense network, which also includes Iron Dome for short-range rockets and David's Sling for medium-range threats. With flight tests already underway and international interest growing, including from Germany, defense officials say Arrow 4 represents a major upgrade in Israel's ability to detect, track, and destroy the most advanced missile threats on the horizon.
Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi is set to visit Israel this Sunday, according to the Prime Minister's office. The high-profile trip highlights the growing ties between Jerusalem and New Delhi. Modi will be in Israel for 2 days, February 25th and 26th, his first official visit since 2017. He's expected to meet Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and other leaders to discuss expanding bilateral cooperation in defense, technology, trade, and regional security. During his visit, Modi is anticipated to address the Knesset, a symbolic step underlining the strategic relationship between the two democracies. This follows several high-level exchanges over the past year and is seen as part of a broader push to deepen partnership amid global and regional challenges. In India, the announcement generated debate, with some political figures criticizing the government for not sharing details directly before the foreign announcement. Modi's previous visit to Israel in July 2017 was historic, marking a new era of diplomatic and strategic cooperation between the two nations. Turning to financial news, where Israeli shipping giant Zim has been sold to Germany's Hapag-Lloyd in a deal valued at $4.2 billion. The agreement was signed in Tel Aviv with a German delegation led by Hapag-Lloyd CEO Rolf Haben Jensen traveling to Israel to finalize the transaction. The company is expected to outline its strategic plans in a joint news conference with Israeli and German media. Under the terms of the deal, Hapag-Lloyd will sell Zim's Israeli operations to the FIMI private equity fund, a move aimed at preserving a strong and independent Israeli shipping presence. FIMI CEO Ishai Davidi said the fund recognizes the strategic importance of maintaining an Israeli shipping company and plans to establish a new Zim with a modern, efficient fleet and broad logistics capabilities. The sale marks one of the largest transactions in Israel's maritime sector and has drawn attention over the transfer of a strategic national company to foreign ownership, even as officials stress that Israeli operations will remain strong and financially resilient. And let's take a look now at the weather forecast. Clear skies are expected around most of the country tonight, with temperatures reaching lows of 11 degrees Celsius or 53 degrees Fahrenheit. Then tomorrow we'll see sunny skies alongside steady temperatures, seeing highs of 16 degrees Celsius or 62 degrees Fahrenheit. That's a wrap for today's news. For the latest updates from Israel on all of your devices, be sure to follow our ILTV channels and keep up with us on social media. That's ILTV_Israel on all platforms. Stay informed with the latest news straight from the heart of Israel. I'm Emily Schrader. Be well, and thank you for watching.
Even with the Nazis, because the Nazis were in a nominally Christian society, I think the Nazis knew we cannot put the death camps in Germany. We have to put them outside. And they did. All the death camps were in occupied Poland or elsewhere. There were concentration camps, labor camps in Germany, but no death camps. So the Nazis, in a way, had to hold back. Hamas did not hold back. So in that respect, Hamas was even worse.
Welcome to the Nosh here, live from Israel. That's right, I'm here with Dinesh D'Souza, famed author and filmmaker. Dinesh, thank you so much for joining me here, and it's a pleasure to have you.
It's my pleasure. Delight to be here in Israel and looking forward to our conversation.
So although we're in Israel right now, we just came off a very, very sad time in the United States, the assassination of Charlie Kirk. Now, I know we're going to talk a lot about what's going on the right. But what are your thoughts about how this could happen in the U.S. and where the left is today in our country?
I think that it's a reflection of the deterioration of our public culture of debate that something like this could happen. A generation ago, I was doing very much what Charlie Kirk has been doing. I spoke on hundreds of campuses. My first book was, in fact, about the university. And there was, people would get agitated once in a while. Someone would run out of the room. Sometimes people would get carried away, call you names. But somehow, I never worried about my physical security. I never thought someone would put a bullet into me. So the fact that when we fast forward to today and see something like this happening, a political assassination of someone who's not even a elected figure, is very shocking development, and I think an effort to silence free speech. In other words, I think it is almost symbolically significant that they shot him in the throat. It's like they were trying to shut down his voice and to scare other people from speaking up.
So does that mean debate is over? We're no longer allowed to have, whether it's a political or social debate, are we no longer allowed to talk about what we believe in?
Certain topics have become so raw that people are willing to resort to violence. Now, it's not every topic, right? Charlie Kirk was not shot over his views on tariffs or on tax cuts. The topics that generate this kind of polarization, abortion is one of them, Palestine, and I would say the trans issue, which appears to be relevant in this case. It looks like that the alleged shooter, was not only motivated by the fact that he had this trans partner, but there seems to have been a trans network of people who were discussing the evils of Charlie Kirk, the evils of the right. And so to some degree, trans ideology in the United States has a violent predisposition. Not to say everybody goes there, but some people go there.
But it's crazy to think that in our country, where we live in the U.S., when we're taught that freedom of speech and we're allowed to share our ideas, whether they be political, social, or just sports events, whatever we want to talk about, that now we're being shut down. We're no longer allowed to give our opinion. How dangerous is that to society as an entire culture?
Profoundly dangerous, because violence leads to violence. In other words, you get a mutual escalation. Most Americans actually are, I would say, quite willing to let trans people be. The problem is that the trans community has a demand, and that is everybody else should put their moral reservations to the side and accept it. And that is the line that I think people aren't willing to give on. So they're like, all right, you can do whatever you want, but don't inflict it on me, don't inflict it on my kids, don't make it part of our educational program, don't subject young people to it, don't have doctors and therapists, kind of arm twist young people. Are you confused? You wonder if you're a boy or a girl? We're going to give you medical hormones and treatments. All of this stuff is where people are not giving in, and I think this is part of what's producing this escalation.
Well, you mentioned the trans issue right now with one of the reasons why. You also mentioned Palestine. Now, if you take the trans community or the LGBTQ, so on and so forth community, who unfortunately you see them on the streets over the world, especially in the U.S., advocating for quote-unquote Palestine or the people in Gaza, what would happen to those exact people if they were living in Gaza?
Right. I mean, I think we know the answer to that in many parts of the Muslim world. I mean, here's a window, go jump out of it, or something in that vein. But in America, people are so insulated from the world, they don't think like that. The way they think is like this. We have to make a coalition of allegedly victimized communities. So the blacks are victims, women are victims in certain ways. Well, the Palestinians are victims, the trans people are victims. So all of us have to create, you could almost call it additive victimization, because that's how we get a winning coalition. This is the way the left
thinks. So what happens when those so-called victims on the left then commit murder or commit assassination and commit other stuff to the people on the other side? Now, are those people victims, or is that, okay, it's fine?
No, they don't think those people are victims. Their view, in fact, is that people like Charlie Kirk have somehow brought it on themselves. And so Charlie Kirk is, in this ideological view, to blame for his own murder, because it's kind of like live by the sword, die by the sword. Even though, if you actually look at anything Charlie Kirk did, very affable guy. He goes on the campus. He has these kind of rap sessions where it's like, ask me anything. He's willing to do rhetorical sparring, but always in a generous spirit. He's always willing to listen to other people.
And gives them their respect as well.
Absolutely. And isn't it ironic that at the very time he's asked about a trans shooting, and he's about to answer, he begins to answer, and boom.
And you say Charlie Kirk, what he did wrong. Charlie Kirk is a proud Christian, a proud patriot, talks about the Bible, talks about morals within society. This is who he was, and this is who they oppose? It doesn't make sense in a society.
It's because of his effectiveness. And not only that, it's because he was reaching the young people. Now, young people are becoming more conservative anyway. What Charlie did is he didn't create that, but he created an institution, a forum, a mechanism for these young people who are beaten down on campus, they're ostracized, they're demonized, they feel under siege. And they could go to Turning Point and meet other people who are like them, and they could relax and go, wow, I'm not the only person, under 30 in the world who thinks like this. So Charlie created, in a sense, a forum for these otherwise neglected and despised conservatives on campus.
Now, we were talking a little bit about the left and what's going on the left. We see the anti-Semitism, the anti-Israel sentiment. Now, is there any fringe sentiments on the right at some? We're talking about conservative Americans, conservative patriots. Has anything from that other side infiltrated into the people on the right as well?
I'm afraid it has, and it's somewhat of a new development. I think if we go back to when I was in my 20s, it was the era of William F. Buckley. It was in the era of Reagan. And Reagan and Buckley, in a way, had no tolerance for this kind of, it's always the Jews, it's always Israel. They pushed those sentiments out of the right. And in a way, they were dormant for a generation. But now they are sneaking their way back. And I think it's a very troubling development because a lot of young people, they have learned to distrust institutions. They like being politically incorrect. They like being rebels. And so if you tell them things like, well, Israel is controlling the United States, they are drawn to something like that because it is a naughty thing to believe, even though if they were to reflect on it and if they were to be properly educated, they would realize this is a fundamentally stupid thing to say. To say that a country of, 10 to 12 million people with a much smaller GDP, which doesn't have anything like the weaponry to match the United States, are somehow, it's kind of like saying that the mosquito is controlling the elephant. I mean, it doesn't make any sense.
And you're also, right now, we're filming in Israel. You're here in Israel. You're seeing that you're talking about 10 to 12 million people in the country. Not all are Jews. There's Jews, Christians, Muslims, Druze, other religions, all living here under this democracy where they're all able to do whatever religion and practice however they choose their religion. You see that here. And this country is the one that's operating as, the handler of the other. How does that even make sense?
Well, unfortunately, some powerful voices on the right have been perpetrating a series, I think, of just blatant falsehoods. One of them, for example, is the idea that Christians are being tormented in Israel. This is, in fact, the opposite of the truth.
Have you felt tormented here at all?
No. And not only that, but it's been very touching for me to go to the kind of historic Christian sites in Israel and look at these churches flourishing. I was actually here around Easter of this year. I saw the Coptic Christians are having a march over here, and then here are the bishops, and here are the Eastern Rite and the Syrian Christians, and the nuns are over here. So there is a great, I would say, not only tolerance, but to some degree welcoming. I had the privilege of doing a one-on-one with Netanyahu for my upcoming film. And he goes, we protect the Christian sites, and Christians are welcome in Israel. And I found that to be true.
You just mentioned your upcoming film, but before you go into that film, what does Israel mean to you as a Christian? You're saying you're coming and you're visiting these sites. You're going to the churches. You're having these religious experiences when you're here around Easter holiday. As a Christian here in Israel and experiencing it, it's seeing it firsthand yourself, how does that make you feel? And what is your feelings in Israel as a Christian?
I know that the civilization of the West, which is what I identify with, is based on really two pillars. Athens and Jerusalem. Until recently, I was extremely familiar with Athens. I've traveled widely. I'm familiar with Greek philosophy, Greek theater, the Greek roots of democracy. I knew about Jerusalem. And of course, I had been raised as a Christian and have even written about Christianity. I've debated a number of the leading atheists around the world, people like Dawkins or Christopher Hitchens.
Oh, wow.
I debated Hitchens, I think, 10 times on various campuses around the United States. But I still had never been to Jerusalem. And I didn't know, I thought of Jerusalem as an idea, the Hebrew prophets, but until I came to Israel and I discovered the country, the people, and also biblical archaeology, which was somewhat new to me. And I thought it was particularly interesting that as the world has become more secular, as you can say, moved away from God, it's almost as if God is speaking back through science, through stones and tablets and seals coming out of the ground. Much of it, by the way, happening since the formation of the State of Israel, and then an acceleration of these archaeological discoveries in the last 10 to 15 years. So I became very intrigued by that, wanted to learn more about that, have immersed myself in that. There's a hint of that in this current film, but I intend to do more work in that area. So Israel is important to me politically, but it's also important to me as a historical and even a religious site.
You just mentioned two things about the film. You talked to Bibi Netanyahu, the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and you're talking about these archaeological excavations and sites that are important in this new film. What is this new film that you have coming out shortly?
The film is about October 7th. It's about Israel. It's about the Palestinians, radical Islam, biblical archaeology, all woven together in a tapestry. So the film is called The Dragon's Prophecy. It has to do with a passage in the book of Revelation in which the dragon, which represents the devil, is waging war on a woman representing Israel. And the woman is in fact pregnant. Now, from a Jewish point of view, you can see the pregnancy as representing the fruits of Israel. But from a Christian point of view, it's Jesus, it's the Messiah. And the dragon is really warring against God. But since the dragon, the devil, can never defeat God, the dragon picks on the people of God, which is the Jews. And the symbolism of the film is to look at October 7th, not just as an ordinary episode of terrorism or even an ordinary political event, but as a kind of biblical event. And in the film, we develop a startling idea, which is that the battle between Israel and the Palestinians, or Hamas, is a kind of eerie replay of the battle between the ancient Israelites and some of the traditional enemies of the Israelites, people like the Philistines.
So you have a lot going on here.
We have a lot going on
from
here.
history to now. So first of all, how could somebody watch the film, follow you, get more information about this? Before I go into a lot more questions I have about a lot of things you just said, but how could somebody follow you and get information about the film?
Very simple. The website is thedragonsprophecyfilm.com. If you go there, you can watch the trailer, you can pre-order streaming, you can buy DVDs. The film will be in theaters in the United States, but only on 2 days, October 6th, October 8th. So we timed it for October 7th. And then the next day, October 9th, it's available in streaming and DVD. It's for me a departure. My earlier films, I've made about 8 documentaries already, and
a lot about American politics and conspiracy theories, but a lot dealing with American politics.
Absolutely, they're all dealing with the meaning of America. I did a film on Obama. I did a film on Hillary Clinton. I've done a film called Trump Card about Trump, and a film about election fraud called 2,000 Mules. And what I like to do in a film is I like to put you on the scene. So in 2,000 Mules, for example, I got cell phone geo-tracking.
I remember this.
Yes.
I watched it many times. That was one of the most amazing things you did with the 2,000 Mules film, that whole geo-tracking of the ballots and everything else. Wow.
Yeah, and what the great thing about that is it doesn't rely on It's not a conspiracy theory, because I'm not saying, hey, listen, I've got these secret affidavits in a bag over here and they will prove this. No, I'm like, listen, you know what? I'm going to show you surveillance footage of what happened in the 2020 election. This footage was taken by the states themselves of these mail-in drop boxes, and I will show you the results of the cell phone geo-tracking. You can decide for yourself. And similarly here, I was quite shocked that most Americans have never seen any real footage of October 7th. They know about it, but it's one thing to know about something. I know about Papua New Guinea, but you need to go there to know what it's like. Same with Israel, by the way. I knew about Israel. I'd never been here until a couple of years ago. So our film opens up with about 10 minutes of unremitting. We put you on the scene. You are right there on October 7th.
So I saw that in the trailer, the few seconds beginning of the trailer. But I have to ask you your feelings. I happen to have been with my family in Israel on October 7th when it happened. We were spending the holiday here. We were in Jerusalem when it happened. Remember that day so vividly like it was yesterday. You seeing, and I'm sure you went through hours and hours of film and content of that day to pick what you want in your film. When you were going through all that and watching it, whether it was on October 7th or 8th or 9th, and leading up to the making of the film, how did that make you feel? What was going through your mind watching the literally history documented on October 7th that Hamas recorded themselves, and just now throughout the entire world, people saying it didn't happen? I always say, if you look at the Holocaust, the Nazis recorded all of their, or a lot of their atrocities they did in the Holocaust because they thought that they were going to destroy the Jewish people, and they were going to make a museum of the Jews to remember what the Jews were, to show the world how they destroyed the Jews and what it was. It took many, many years for all of the people, or a lot of people, to say the Holocaust didn't happen and the Holocaust denial. It wasn't right away. But what I saw differently and experienced it here on October 7th, and then after when I went back home to the United States, it was just happening so fast that people were saying it never happened. It's a conspiracy theory. It never happened. Hamas never did it. And we have all this documentation from Hamas. It didn't take years, unfortunately, like in the Holocaust. Thoughts, process, why, how?
Yeah, so two things come to mind. One is, right after October 7th, my wife joined a Telegram channel where she was getting partly from the IDF, but mostly from people who were collecting videos from Hamas. The terrorists themselves had live streamed on WhatsApp and other places. And so my wife was like, take a look at this, take a look at this. At that time, I didn't know I was making a film.
And you were home in Houston at the time?
I was in Houston, yeah. And so I'd watch this stuff and I would be like, wow. And the live streaming thing struck me because, look, even with the Nazis, because the Nazis were in a nominally Christian society, I think the Nazis knew we cannot put the death camps in Germany. We have to put them outside. And they did. All the death camps were in occupied Poland or elsewhere. There were concentration camps, labor camps in Germany, but no death camps. So the Nazis, in a way, had to hold back. Hamas did not hold back. So in that respect, Hamas was even worse because we're proud of this. This is our accomplishment for the world to see. That's the first thing I noted, even at the time. The second thing I noted, though, is that I think for maybe good reasons, the government of Israel decided we are not going to parade the October 7th footage. We're going to bring in groups of journalists from the BBC, Sky News. We'll show it to them, not realizing that when you're dealing with these ideological journalists, these people are propagandists. They don't care.
I was just about to ask, are they real journalists? Because
No.
a journalist is supposed to give you over the news and not the propaganda that they want to put on their narrative.
These people could watch that footage and laugh, if you can believe it. So I realized that this footage, which is out there, and my wife, we had like hours of it, has actually never been seen widely in the United States, maybe in the world. And so I said, this is how we open our film. And I said, I realize that some of the footage may be too much to show, but a lot of it does need to be seen. And so we have a graphic warning video, graphic warning label. But on the other hand, get ready for like 10 minutes of being on the scene of October 7th, because only against that backdrop can you understand what's going on. It's kind of like saying, I want to make a movie about the Pacific War in World War II, but I'm not going to show Pearl Harbor. Well, that's how it started. That's what got it going. You have to begin there.
Now, you saw a lot of this documentation. What do you say to people who say, oh, there were no citizens who did anything on October 7th. The Gaza citizens weren't involved, but yet you see these citizens crossing the border and committing atrocities also.
Not only that, but you see hostages dragged back to Gaza, and you see the jubilation of the citizens. I mean, we show in the film, there are women and children dancing in the streets. I mean, in a sense, again, coming back to the biblical parallel, it says in the Bible that when Samson, who represents the strength of Israel, was captured by the Philistines, they blinded him, step one. They dragged him back to Gaza, and the citizens said, bring him out so we can be entertained. And so Samson was paraded through Gaza to the jubilation of the citizens of Gaza, then the Philistines, and they made a spectacle of him. So look at the
parallels over here.
Right?
You're bringing out a little parallels in this.
Right, and so we're trying to widen the angle of perception so people can see these events not only in a new light, but also begin to see how these events bear on them. Because the Bible is speaking broadly to us as human beings, not merely to one group of people or another. So the film is about Israel, but it's bigger than Israel.
But you're starting October 7th. You're going through all of the history, archaeological sites. You're in the city of David. You're seeing Jerusalem from thousands of years ago brought back to life for us in modern society to understand that Jews, Christians walked those streets thousands of years ago. You, as a Christian, coming and walking those same streets that our prophets and people did, how does that make you feel that you're able to do that in this 2025 year that we're in?
It's remarkable. It's remarkable because in many ways, having lived most of my life in the academic world, I was, after Dartmouth, I was at various think tanks, the American Enterprise Institute in Washington, D.C., the Hoover Institution at Stanford. I'm very much a product of this kind of skeptical environment in which people would say things like, well, you know, the Bible, it has some moral insights, but it's fundamentally mythological. It was written by people, you know, decades or even hundreds of years after the events it describes. Therefore, the biblical stories have to be treated as somewhat legendary, somewhat made up. And so what I find striking is that figures like the historic David or Jeremiah or Isaiah, and I would have thought, it's one thing to go back to the time of Christ 2,000 years ago. It's another thing to go back 4,000 years ago or to 1000 BC. That's about the time of David and Solomon. You would have thought that maybe not much will ever be found to validate those individuals as historic figures. And yet there is. And not only that, but part of what blew me away was the minutia, right? So in other words, right around the city of David, they pull out of the ground a seal. And it has the name of a guy, Jukal, I guess in English, son of Shelemiah, right? Now this guy is a very minor figure in the Bible. He's barely mentioned. He was dispatched by King Zedekiah to go keep an eye on the prophet Jeremiah. Like, watch Jeremiah. Make sure he doesn't cause
I took a tour this summer, and I got the whole same history, so this is amazing.
Yeah. Right. So in fact, when they found the seal, the person who found the seal didn't even know this was a biblical figure, but somebody thought, let's just put this guy into a search database, and they were like, wait, this guy is mentioned in the book of Jeremiah, again, as a very minor figure. So here's my point. Think of how decisively this refutes people who said, this was made up 300 years later. Nobody 300 years later would know about this guy. They might have heard of David. They might have heard of Solomon. They certainly would not have heard of Jokal, son of Shelemiah.
Some aide in the king's castle.
There you go. There's another seal from the royal steward. The guy was basically looking after the royal residences. And so the Bible is coming alive, I think. And what's beautiful is it's coming alive through the techniques of science. So not only is this to me theologically like affirming and interesting, but I also think politically it's very valuable, because what it's showing is the presence of the Jews in their own ancestral homeland. The whole idea that the Jews are outsiders, they're colonialists, all of this is like decisively refuted by the developments, not just in the city of David, but all over Israel.
And you have the archaeological proof right here being dug up daily, which is just insane in and of itself if you think about it. But you did mention earlier on that you do touch on extremism in the movie also, and especially Islam, Muslim extremism, and we see it around the world, let alone in this region, and what's happening within our borders and with the people surrounding our borders of Israel, and that's happened in the United States and other countries around the world. How or what is your opinion on how we combat or stop this extremism? And if we don't, where is it going?
The thing that disturbs me the most about this radical Islam, as I generally describe it, is its extremely peculiar alliance with the secular left. This is not something that you would have expected.
No.
And yet, both sides see each other as allies. This is why the radical Muslims are very happy when the left is in power. They are joined at the hip at the universities. If you go to the anti-Israel rallies, you basically meet two types of people. You meet radical Muslims and secular leftists.
Oh, I thought they call them useful idiots.
Well, it's the left thinks that they are using the Muslims as part of their big coalition. They think, okay, we got the gays over here, the Hispanics over there, the black women over here. Oh yes, you know, you radical Muslims, this is your spot. You're part of our rainbow coalition, right? The radical Muslims don't see it that way. The way they see it is, you can sneak us into your tent. We realize that we have to travel under your banner to be able to get to power. So if we were to allow this coalition to win, at some future time, there would be an internal battle between the secular leftists and the radical Muslims. And I think at that point, it's quite possible the radical Muslims will win.
Is that like the end of the war? Because you're talking about the prophecy and with the dragon. Do you see that going towards the end of the prophecy as well, or where does that veer off a little bit?
Prophecy is, of course, a very tricky business because we're talking about the future. I do not, and in the film, we don't try to decipher the events that are to come. It's very difficult to do. I think the book of Revelation is deliberately obscure and veiled. It uses a lot of extravagant imagery. It's almost poetic. I don't think it's meant for us to try to lay out as a chronology. But it does predict an apocalyptic showdown between the force of good and evil. No question about that. And it calls on Jews and Christians, I think, to go back to roots. And what that means is that just as Jews today, I think, need to be strong like the ancient Israelites, go back to the beginning, Christians need to be strong in the sense of going back to the book of Acts, which is the description of early Christianity. And I think that Christians and Jews should recognize that we are in this together. We have common political foes, and that united we can win.
So what you're saying is the future is a coalition of, we have what you mentioned is the coalition on the left, which is a terrible coalition that's only getting worse and